Hello everyone, and welcome to the 58th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. A spoiled rotten, royal pain, Azula is a fantastic secondary antagonist, one that manages to steal the show from her father in many different ways, cementing herself in the minds of millions of viewers as one of the prime examples of a selfish and exceptionally cruel evil born from the highly negative influences that surround her. In this video, we're going to explore the inner workings of this spiteful, power-hungry creature, taking information from the show, as well as the two graphic novels, The Search and Smoke and Shadow, examining every detail of who this beast in a girl's body is, and how she came to be such a wretched being. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Let's start with Azula's background. Azula proved herself to be an innately talented, resourceful, intelligent, and ruthless child from the outset. Whereas Zuko takes after their gentle and more loving mother, Azula is her father's child through and through. Ozai is a narcissistic, megalomaniacal psychopath, a man so consumed with the idea of ruling that he inflicts massive amounts of pain and suffering on others in order to further his own ambitions, and he has little to no empathy for others. Azula is much the same, and during the few times we see her and her father interacting when she was younger, we see them playing off of one another's malicious intent. For example, there's a flashback in the graphic novel The Search, where Azula is talking to her parents about how her firebending lessons went earlier in the day. Here, she explains that her teacher was scolding her on her form, and when she tried to tell her teacher that her way of doing things produced the biggest fireball, he still remained adamant about reprimanding her for her form. So, she set his pants on fire in retaliation. In response, Ozai declares that her teacher is a fool, and that he should have him sent to the colonies as a punishment. This is the kind of overreacting, self-righteous behavior that they're both prone to, and anyone who dares challenge Azula is quickly dealt with, whether they're right or wrong. Now, not only does Azula harm her teacher here, but she's quite open about expressing her joy at doing so, and that's because Azula is without a doubt a sadist with a lack of conscience. And as we can see, this behavior has been present within her since her childhood. This is far from being the only example though, as we see it when Zuko throws a rock at some turtle ducks, explaining to his mother that he learned how to feed them that way from Azula. Later in the same scene, we see Azula push over Ty Lee when she cartwheels better than her, and she laughs at her when she's on the ground. When she notices May's crush on Zuko, she places an apple on her head and shoots fire at her in order to have Zuko save her, a complete disregard for her friend's safety that's done in order to entertain herself. It's these two traits, sadism and cruelty, along with immense narcissism, that ultimately define Azula's personality. And throughout this series, she constantly displays them in nearly every situation in one form or another. This cruelty bleeds over into her appearance and mannerisms. As though Azula is a beautiful girl, her beauty is overshadowed by her rage and ill intent, her power-hungry, wrathful gaze, reflecting the malice that lives within her, her flippant and callous movements displaying the superiority that she feels, every ounce of her being exuding an aura of confident and brutal dominance. Now, there's no doubt that Azula inherited some of these traits from her father, but genetic inheritance isn't the only thing that shapes a person. It's the influences of those around them. As although she takes after her father, you have to wonder how much of the behavior Azula displays was learned rather than innate to her person. She's predisposed to this behavior, but perhaps if the adults that were around her for her to emulate were her mother or her Uncle Iroh, she might have turned out differently. Instead, she grew up under the watchful eye of her father, as Ozai saw Azula for the prodigy she is at a young age, and he took her under his wing as his secret heir. And as a result, Azula spent her childhood watching her father display his own brand of cruelty and sadism, and due to her wishing to please him in every way possible, she strived to be a person like her father from an early age, and it was all but inevitable that she should take after him more than anyone else. As she grew older, Azula would adopt a crucial tactic her father employed in order to subjugate those around her, instilling fear into those who you wish to bend to your will. Azula learned early on that the best way for those around her to submit to her was to taunt them with the prospect of torture, imprisonment, or even death if they displeased her in any way. I imagine servants cowered in fear at the thoughts of tugging a hair on her head while brushing her hair. Her friends ran in terror whenever they were recruited to join any of Azula's deadly games. And family members, well, most of them anyway, stood horrified as Azula displayed a level of cruelty that was on par with her dread father. As she grew older, these same people continued to fear her. But upon being placed in command of a contingent of her own soldiers, she now had a new host of victims to prey upon, victims that she could use to inflict carnage on a massive scale. One of the best examples we're given of her dominant and fear-inducing personality is shown to us during our introduction to her in the show, where the captain of her ship tells her that the tide won't allow their ship to be brought into port. She responds by reminding him that she commands her ship, not the tides, and unless he'd like to be thrown overboard, he'd best do as she commands. This use of fear in combination with her heightened level of intelligence is a lethal combination that precious few are equipped to handle. Now, throughout this show, Azula doesn't display much mercy, and though she may not show much empathy, it can't be said that she doesn't understand people, as she's a master manipulator and tactician, one who utilizes threats, coercion, and bribery to shape both enemies and allies alike. We see this when she conquers Ba Sing Se from within, a plot that Azula brings to fruition by outsmarting another experienced manipulator, Long Feng, a man who had considerably more experience in this field than her. Through infiltrating the palace and displaying her might and superior intellect to the Dai Li, Azula was able to stage a coup in the city and secure it as a stronghold of the Fire Nation without shedding any blood, a feat that few can claim to have accomplished when engaging in such a dangerous and precarious endeavor. Now, while Azula is an exceptional despotic princess, she's an abysmal person overall, and her entire being is defined by her constant desire to emulate her father in nearly every way. And because of this, the one time we see Azula in a normal setting while she's on vacation with Zuko and her friends, she flounders, displaying a social ineptitude that can only come from years of isolation and conditioning that was brought on by her royal upbringing. However, this episode gives us the one and only moment of vulnerability that Azula displays throughout this entire series. It's brief, but when Azula and Zuko are speaking about their mother, Azula laments that her mother saw her as a monster, which she does acknowledge was a correct assessment on her part. But this moment shows us that even though she presents an unflinching, hardened exterior, Azula has her own insecurities. Though we don't see Azula acknowledging her inner feelings after this moment, we do get to see some of them come to the surface upon her ascension to the position of Fire Lord. Prior to this, Azula had been betrayed by the only two friends she had ever known, which, while sending her into a rage, also profoundly affected her on a deeper level that she was unwilling to acknowledge. As now, aside from her father, she had no one in the entire world to whom she could rely on or turn to in confidence, and she was now dangerously close to being alone. After her father leaves the Fire Nation to begin the scouring of the Earth Kingdom, she finds herself without a person in the world she can call a true ally. Here, it's revealed to us that Azula is wholly unprepared to rule a nation, and her hard exterior begins to crack under the pressures of ruling. She becomes increasingly unstable, her mood and mannerisms erratic and irrational, dark circles forming under her eyes as she loses sleep over the thought of treachery at every turn. It's safe to say that Azula's mind has been consumed by paranoia. Up until this point in her life, Azula has exclusively relied on fear and manipulation in order to get what she wants. And after losing her only two friends and her father, she's found herself panicking alone in a cesspool of fear and mistrust that she created for herself. Knowing full well how easy it is to corrupt people and fracture their loyalties, Azula becomes suspicious of everyone, and in this state of unending paranoia, she becomes nothing short of an unhinged, petulant despot, banishing people left and right for the smallest mistakes or at the slightest suspicion. It's here that a condition that likely lay dormant within her for many years manifests for the first time: paranoid schizophrenia. Surfacing as a result of the pressure she's under, Azula begins to manifest her insecurities in the form of her mother, a woman that she had always longed to feel love from. And as she's butchering her own hair as if it were her enemy, a vision of her mother appears to her, telling Azula that she's always loved her. And seeing as this is but a vision from Azula's own mind, this moment highlights how Azula has always known that her mother loved her, and it was her need for control and jealousy of her mother's relationship with her brother that kept her from realizing this. Though the pressures of her impending position as Fire Lord were breaking down her psyche, it ended up remaining just that, impending, as after her coronation was interrupted by her brother and Katara, Azula suffered her final defeat at the hands of a girl she viewed as nothing more than a peasant, flailing and screaming in her bonds like the spoiled child she is, this defeat completely breaking her already fragile mind. However, this wasn't the end for Azula, and during the events of the Search graphic novel, we come across an Azula who has been locked away in an unnamed institution, her paranoid schizophrenia worsening during her incarceration. After agreeing to help Zuko find their banished mother, we find out just how far gone she's become. Azula has become so deranged and disassociated with the world that she blames everything on her mother, or rather, the hallucination of her mother that she's conjured within her own mind. May and Tylee's betrayal, her father abandoning her, her defeat at the hands of Zuko, and the rifts within her mind are all attributed to her mother. When it comes down to it, this is nothing but a deflection. Azula's attempts at shifting the blame for all the terrible things that she's done and that have happened to her onto someone else, as she is unwilling and unable to come to grips with the fact that she's the one to blame for all the misery that has occurred in her life. Now, throughout this journey, Azula attempts several times to betray and kill Zuko and the Avatar gang, and that's terrible enough in itself. But the worst part comes at the conclusion of their journey, where we find out that the reason Azula agreed to come with them in the first place was to kill her mother, something that she believed would stop the hallucinations she was having and sever her mother's influence over her once and for all. The folly of this approach can only be deemed a good solution by a crazed mind, and in this moment of manic-filled murderous intent, one can't help but to feel sorry for Azula, as she's so delusional and desperate to bring an end to her pain that she would resort to killing her own mother in order to heal herself. And I'm sure if she had fulfilled this dark purpose, she would have only driven herself deeper into madness. Thankfully, she fails, and during the following year, she hides herself from the world, and during that time period, she seems to have found some semblance of inner peace, healing the hallucinations of her mother that plagued her mind. However, she still remains Azula. Her return is marked by a plot she constructed with May's father, one that would, on the surface, see Zuko ousted as a usurper, and her father returned to the throne. To do so, she recruits a group of women she freed from the institution she was housed in, to masquerade as child-stealing spirits, known as the Kemurikage, taking children from their beds in the dead of night, and housing them in a secret base, in order to sow chaos and destabilize the Fire Nation, fracturing her brother's already fragile hold over his country. Though it would seem that this plot was done in service to restoring Ozai, it was in fact a ploy, one designed to force Zuko into taking more drastic, forceful, and decisive action, revealing the traits he shares with his father and Azula that he has locked deep within him, traits that Azula believes are necessary for a Fire Lord to have in order to strengthen and preserve the Fire Nation. Azula reveals that her new goal is to serve as Zuko's advisor, manipulating him into bringing out these traits that she so believes he needs to exploit in order to rule, descending into the shadows for now, to wait for the right moment to reveal herself once again. This may not be the last we see of Azula, but as it stands now, who is Azula? She was a child born into the most powerful family in the world, one that showed exceptional talent and brilliance from a young age. Made in her father's image, Azula would spend her childhood attempting to live up to the legacy of the man who she had derived so much of herself from, molding herself into a replica of Ozai by pushing herself to excel in every endeavor she undertook, becoming well-versed in firebending, martial arts, and military tactics. During her years serving under her father, Azula would sow discord and strife, hunting and conquering in her father's name, and destroying thousands of lives along the way. Though there isn't much death shown to us in this series, it's safe to say Azula, whenever possible, would prefer murder over diplomacy, and violence over compromise. She's a woman who holds the same desire as her father, absolute power, and she's willing to do anything and everything to secure it for herself, and to a lesser extent, her family. Deep down, Azula isn't without humanity, but what small amount of humanity she does hold within her is suffocated by her overwhelming cruelty and lack of mercy, marking Azula as a woman to be feared and a force to be reckoned with. Selfish, spiteful, snide, cunning, and brutal, Azula is a terrifying example of a corrupted child who was given the freedom to play out any dark desire they could imagine. A woman so consumed by her own grandeur that she has no qualms about causing immense amounts of misery for everyone around her, reveling in the chaos that unfolds from her fiery fingertips. A person who bathes in the burning flames of her own evil. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Azula? Did I miss anything? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured in a future episode while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, and to my patrons, and a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and Reddit to interact with myself and the community, and follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.